That's for you. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Happy Shabbat Shuvah, and thank you for joining us. And Michael and Joyce, thank you for joining us. And Michael, thank you for teaching us. Let's thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. And then Michael, if you'll come and share with us the backstory of this book of poetry, and then take it away. So together on the laminated prayer, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'ha'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha be'Yisrael. V'nihya anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha be'Yisrael. Kulanu yod'ei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten ha'Torah. So Shabbat Shalom, and Michael, if you could come on up and kind of begin with the backstory of this book, Shiva, and then take it away with the content.
Sure. Thank you, Wes. Shabbat Shalom. Before discussing the book specifically, I just want to mention a little bit about this whole idea of poetry following trauma in the Jewish tradition, and it seems to be a Jewish thing. I mean, I don't remember after September 11th a whole lot of American poetry about that, but in our tradition, actually our Torah reading today is Ha'azinu, which is a poem written following the trauma of going through the desert for 40 years. When the temple was destroyed, the Book of Lamentations was poetry. The Crusades, when across Europe Jewish communities were attacked, there were lots of poems called piyutim. The Kishinev pogrom poetry followed that, and of course the Holocaust. So it's not surprising that after October 7th we see poems as a way to express the feelings, the emotions, and it seems to be part of our Jewish tradition. So this book, just to give you the history, Rachel Korazim started coming to Temple Emmanuel maybe 10 or 11 years ago and teaching us, and somewhere along the line I got involved in helping her with her English translations. When COVID came, Rachel began teaching Hebrew poetry almost every day of the week on Zoom. And she has hundreds of students globally taking her courses. And these were the traditional poems, Bialik, Chernichovsky, but also the modern Hebrew poems. And but then shortly after October 7th, she began to focus on poems about October 7th. And she, that was the focus of the poetry. Sometime around March or April, we were approached by a publisher who said, "We hear you're doing these poems, and I'd like to do a book about the poems." So we said, fine, and we started working with that publisher. And unfortunately, after about 2 months, the publisher said, "You know what, I don't think there's a market for a book with Hebrew and English, so how about we just do the English translations?" And so we fired that publisher because we really felt it was important to have the Hebrew. And we had a hustle to find somebody else, and because it was important to get the book published before October 7th. So essentially the book is self-published on Amazon, but we did have somebody help us with the typesetting. And so we did get the book out, and I can say to the publisher who said no one would buy it, we haven't done any advertising or anything, but I think over 3,500 copies have been sold on Amazon. It's listed as a bestseller, but that's in very narrow categories like Middle Eastern poetry. But anyway, that's the background of the book. So if you have the handouts, the first poem, and if you're working with a book, this poem is on page 2 and 3. In Hebrew, one of the ways to say let's start at the beginning is lahatchil me breshit, to start with breshit, and that's also in some Hebrew songs. So we're going to start with breshit, and this first poem references a verse from the creation story, and it's also especially relevant because if you remember, October 7th was Simchat Torah. So what were they reading? What was being read around the globe that morning is the first chapter of Breshit, and also the second chapter, which this verse is from. So this has special meaning as well. And this is actually, I don't know that I'm going to read all of the poems in Hebrew just because of time. Don't tell Rachel that I didn't read all of the poems in Hebrew. But let me just read this one first. And I want to just point out something. The word echoes, is a word. If you look at the translation, it appears 4 times in this poem. These echoes. The word in Hebrew for echo is hed. The verb echoed is hidheid. It's an echo itself. It's onomatopoeia. So just listen for that in the Hebrew. Okay, the poem is Choshech al Pnei Tehom, and it's by Tzur Goethe, who was a poet. Hamora Michal sha'ala otanu, mikan yodea lomar li, ma perush pasuk v'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al Pnei Tehom. Kol hashanim ha'ela me'az v'ad hayom hidhada ota she'ela betochi, hidhadu bi einei hamora hamachapsot etzba munefet, hidhadha bi ota hashtika hagorefet. ב7 באוקטובר הדהד צלצול הטלפון בביתה הדומם של המורה מיכל. זה אני אמרתי, הנה התוהו ובוהו, הנה החושך, הנה התהום, shalom. Darkness over the surface of the abyss. My teacher Michal once asked us, who can tell me the meaning of the verse, the earth was chaos and confusion, tohu vabohu, with darkness over the surface of the abyss. All these years from then to this very day, that question has echoed within me. The teacher's eyes as she was looking for a raised hand echoed in me. That all-encompassing silence echoed in me. On October 7th, the ringing telephone echoed in the silent home of my teacher Michal. It's me, I said. Here's your chaos and confusion. Here's your darkness. Here's your abyss. Goodbye. Basically, this poem is saying that this was an undoing of creation. Creation took chaos and confusion and turned it into order. October 7th was a reversal of that. Grown student says, I get it now. I now know what chaos and confusion, tohu vavohu, really means. Well, one of the interesting things you have challenges in translation. You always have multiple ways to translate things. So the last word of this poem is shalom. We had several choices. We could say peace, goodbye, hello, or shalom. So we could have just said shalom. We went with goodbye. I mean, any of those would have been an appropriate translation, but we felt that in this case, shalom meant goodbye when you complete a phone call. So, Wes.
To answer your question about your translation, the last 2 lines, Hinei hatahu bahu, I think literally means here's the chaos and confusion. Hinei hachoshech means here's the darkness. Hinei hatahom means here's the abyss. It's not choshech or tachomech. What was your thinking in putting the your instead of going from the chaos confusion to your chaos confusion?
So that was a discussion with the poet. Every one of these translations by the way, the translations were done by Rachel, Heather Silverman, and myself. All 3 of us worked on every translation. It went through a number of changes over email, back and forth. And I would say everybody kind of added something to it. Heather was very good at sort of making it sound a little more poetic. But we did give these to the poets to look at. And the poet here said that what the message he was trying to, and that was exactly the way she worded it. And it's unusual. Usually the poets didn't give us things, but she said what she wanted. It's like, I'm showing you that, I'm showing you what it is. You were asking what it is. You didn't get an answer. Now I'm telling you what it is. So it was just that sort of, okay, you asked for it kind of thing. But thank you for the question. Thank you. Okay, looking at the next poem that we're going to look at, it's Strong as Death, and if you have your books, it's on page 19. So the most interesting thing about this is, again, a translation challenge. The name of the poem is Azah Kamavet, and as you will see, Azah Kamavet comes from the book of Song of Songs, where it says that love is Azah Kamavet, love is strong as death, or sometimes translated fierce as death. Love is strong as death. That's Azah Kamavet. It can also be read Azah Kamavet. Azah is how you say Gaza in Hebrew. So that means, so if you look, you'll see that we translated the title Strong as Death. The final line of the poem is the same words, and we translated Gaza is like death. So I'll just read this. Okay, Strong as Death by Shlomit Naim Naor. There's no point in sleep. Images surface. There's no point in waking. The visions are real. The moment before rising, I know nothing of the horrors of war. Every night I hold something in my hand that slips and shatters, glass shards of reality scratch my face, teardrops of dawn. God is hiding in a cellar, bereft of prayer, trembling for his deeds. His whole being is a scream. Slashed women are running towards me, holding headless babies, a flock of hanging ravens. Gaza is like death. So, again, this poem has a lot here. You have these awful images of what was happening on that day. It starts out with this idea, I can't sleep, I can't wake. Both of them have their challenges. It suggests maybe there's a brief moment right before I wake up, very brief moment where I can forget the horrors of war. But beyond that, whether I'm asleep or awake, I'm tormented by these visions of war. Whether it's the vision or the reality, they're both very scary. And then this poem in the middle has a theme which we see in a lot of these poems, a number of them have them, that really are challenging God or asking, where was God? And the answer here, God is hiding in a cellar, bereft of prayer. So God hiding, if you look at the Hebrew there, it's mistater b'martef. There's a concept called hester panim. This is when God hides his face, and they're saying God was hiding. This is not an omnipotent God. This is a weak God. This is a God that says bereft of prayer. This is a God whose whole being is a scream. And as I say, this is something that a number of the poems struggle with, and we'll see one other one fairly soon. The next poem is Kaddish. It's on page 21 in the book. This is by Asaf Gur, who was, besides being a poet, he was also a journalist, and that becomes relevant for the poem. You know what, I'm going to read this poem only because not all of these poems have rhyme. This one does. I should point out that we did not try to duplicate rhyme or meter in our translations. We tried to make them sound poetic, but sometimes when you try to put rhyme in, you lose some of the actual meaning, and we wanted to stay fairly close to that. I will say that this was always a little contest. Heather and I had slightly different views towards this. I was always working more toward fidelity towards the poem. She was working towards fidelity towards the English language, and we kind of managed to work it out all the time, sometimes with some compromises, but that's one of the challenges of translation. So let me just read this poem in Hebrew. Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah, v'af echad lo ba. Kama alafim karu lo b'shabbat baboker, za'aku et shmo. Hitchananu b'demaot sherak yavo, aval hu shavat mikol malachto. Shum Elohim lo higia, v'shum Elohim lo hirgia, rak hasatan chagag b'li hafra'a, mifazez ben hakibutzim lemesibat tevach, v'katavenu mosif u'medaveach, ben levein gam mityapeach, sheyesh tinok saruf, v'yesh tinok chatuf, yesh tinok yatom, v'yesh tinok ben yom, mutal mechubar bechevel hatabur legufat imo, v'lo hispik afilu legalot ma shmo, ma yeroshem al hamatzeva hakatantana, im ta'arich echad leleida belaptira. Kach nireh hakibutz achar bikur hasatan, machazir et hashidur la'ulpan. Achshav sheket yorim, yesh gam shigurim, ve'en memshala, ve'en rachamim, v'rak hatzrachot v'hatmunot, lo yitzu l'olam meharosh, hashvi'i ba'October 2023. In English, Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, and no one came. Many thousands called to him on Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, tearfully begging him just to come, but he had ceased from all his work. No God arrived, and no God provided comfort. Only Satan celebrated uninterrupted, dancing between kibbutzim and the festival of slaughter. And our correspondent goes on to report, sobbing all the while, that there is a burnt baby and an abducted baby. There's an orphaned baby and a day-old baby still linked by the umbilical cord to his mother. He wasn't even able to learn his own name that will be inscribed on the tiny headstone with a single date for birth and death. This is what the kibbutz looks like after Satan's visit. Turning the broadcast back to the studio, quiet now. They're shooting. They're also launching rockets. There is no government. There is no mercy. Just the screaming and the images that will never leave the mind. The 7th of October, 2023. This is another one of these poems that sort of asks about where God was. And again, I mentioned for previous poem that it focused on Simchat Torah as connecting to it, so it was also Shabbat. This poem says, where was God? God, he was resting. He ceased from all his work. You know, we have in the Kiddush, which actually comes from the Torah, Vayishbot bayom hashvi'i mikol melachto asher asa. That's what the Hebrew is. Ushavat mikol melachto. God was taking a day off. People were praying, no one came. No God arrived and no God provide comfort. Yes?
I read it a little bit differently.
Yes.
It says in two places, ve'af echad lo ba, and down it says ve'en memshala. It's the feeling of the people in kibbutzim we left alone. No one is knocking on our door, nobody comes to help.
That's definitely true. I don't know if people could hear that, the comment that no one came referred not just to God, but there was no help from anywhere. And actually, we'll see a reference to that a little later in the poem that supports that reading. There's a line in here about Satan celebrating dancing between the kibbutzim and the festival of slaughter. So this is the Nova festival, and in Hebrew, it was a nature festival, and nature is teva, and slaughter is tevach. So mesibat tevach in Hebrew is instead of mesibat teva. So it wasn't a nature festival; it was a slaughter festival. Further down in the poem, there is the line, "There is no government, there is no mercy," and that, again, there was a failure of God, and there was a failure of government. And when there's a failure of government, there is no mercy. There was just no order. Here's another, just a translation thing. The very first line of this is the first line of the Kaddish. So there's a couple things you could do. We ended up saying Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah. We also could have said, and one of the iterations of the translation was Yisgadal v'yisgadash shemei Rabbah, an Ashkenazic instead of Sephardic pronunciation. And again, there are different resonances to how you do that. We went with this. We could have also translated that line. And even when in Hebrew, Yikadal v'yikadash shemei Rabbah, va'af echad lo ba. You have a rhyme. So it could have said, for example, something like, magnified and sanctified is his name, and no one came. So it's just, translation is a fascinating exercise. Yes, Wes.
What is the meaning to be made of the fact that he's capturing the horror, atrocity, darkness, brutality of that day in a poem called Kaddish, which begins with Kabal Kadash Narva? What's the meaning to be made from Kaddish describing the slaughter festival?
Well, I think there's an irony in there that he's talking about people praying to God and there was no response. But the prayer that he starts out with is the prayer that we recite after people have died. So it was really, that's the prayer that gets recited after the fact, because the prayers that were being recited weren't being listened to. If you have another interpretation, I don't know, but I think that this is really a memorial for people who died with a cry out about the absence of God. And as I said, this poet happens to be a journalist, so that's why he brings in this sort of idea about getting a report from the field from a journalist, reporting about all of the terrible things, and the journalist is sobbing all the while. Yes?
I'm wondering about poems where people know the absence of God and whether any of them are religious or not.
So I don't know in all cases. There is it's interesting. One of the poems in the book that is called, the title is "We Need a New Torah Now," was actually written by an Orthodox rabbi. And he actually took some flack for it, and I saw actually a talk he gave, a lengthy talk justifying how he was saying that this is a traditional concept of a new Torah. We're not getting rid of the old Torah necessarily, but we need a new Torah. So some of these people are religious people who do this, and I should say that this tradition of challenging God is an old tradition. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak and Berditchev, others, so even traditional Jews have raised that issue, starting with Moses. Yes?
These thoughts are universal. About 20 years ago, Tom Waits wrote a song called Georgia Lee, and about the death and the gruesome death of a young woman. And the key lines are, why wasn't God watching? Why wasn't God listening? Why wasn't God there for Georgia? And these are universal sentiments.
They are. I think it's particularly poignant when it's in Hebrew and it's all of this language is tied with religious imagery in the Bible. But you're right. It's not something new, but it's an old Jewish tradition as well. The next poem we're going to look at is on page 51, and the title is Prayer. And this is a poem, a mother's poem about a girl who has been kidnapped. And when I first read this, the image I have is of a little girl, but I suppose it could also be an older girl as well. Prayer by Avital Nadler. When you return, we'll sit, just the two of us in the shower. You in the gentle water, I facing you, will gently wash your hair. Erase all your memories. We'll sing to you the song of the hyacinth and of the rain tickling the window. I will carefully clean from between your toes every trace of the tunnels. I will tell you about the moon that shone so many nights when you weren't here. I will wipe my tears off your face. The gentle water will wash your tears away. I will braid your hair, dress you in pajamas, just the two of us in bed, and a caring hug, hope, love, fear, and a prayer that there will never be a next time. This poem, you know, if you just read it, except for one word that gives it very real context, the word tunnels. If you just read this poem and you didn't know what it was about, it would still be a beautiful poem, but as soon as you see the word tunnels in there, you know where this child is. And by the way, the Song of the Hyacinth, there's a Hebrew lullaby that parents sing to children. It's a poem by Leah Goldberg, who was a well-known poet, and it's about the hyacinth, lullaby of the hyacinth, and it has the moon in it, so this is all reflected in here. The other thing that's sort of interesting is that the poem is entitled Prayer. And again, you say this is a prayer that she will return, and I suppose that's a proper reading. But actually, if you read it, it's when you return. In other words, this person, you're going to return, and this is what's going to happen. And the prayer, as it says in the last two lines, a prayer that there will never be a next time. So.
One comment here.
Yes, sure.
I know translation is difficult, but in Hebrew, when you read it, it's a woman talking with another woman. But I think it's lost in the translation somehow.
Yes,
So
that's
the way the English language is structured.
right. So it's a mom and it's a girl. Absolutely. This is also something that we struggled with all the time, because Hebrew always indicates the gender of both the subject and the object of a sentence. And sometimes we might add something like little girl or something like that. We could have said that, little girl when you return. And it's always a debate to how to convey that. And actually, the last two poems that we do today, I actually asked Michelle to read because I really thought it should be read in a woman's voice. So, but this poem properly should be read in a woman's voice too, I suppose, as well. It's a mom and a daughter. And then, you know, you think, as I said, you think about little girls, but, you know, it's a whole different story. Let's say that the daughter was 20 years old, and what went on in the tunnels. So it's, you know, you just sort of have to think about it in various scenarios. The next poem also involves a small child. The poem was written by, and this is a poem on page 109 in the book, and the poet Avital Liman happens to be also a kindergarten teacher. Right after October 7th, whole communities were evacuated, many to the Dead Sea, where they moved into hotels. So she left her home and she went to the hotel to help take care of the children. So this is a poem about her seeing a small child in a hotel. The poem is, "Nowadays, one has to check." In the evacuees' hotel by the Dead Sea, she carefully gathers the doll's hair with a ribbon. She attaches a sparkling pipe cleaner to the ribbon, and then she asks, "Tell me, am I alive? And how would they know if I were dead? What would you say to a 4-year-old girl? Only the living can hug. Come, let's hug and see if we're alive." Later she says, "Tomorrow morning, let's check again." So, I mean, these were children who had seen parents, grandparents, siblings, friends killed a day or two before. And what is death? How do I know that I'm alive? The next poem that we're going to do is on page 141. It's entitled Be'eri. As you probably know, Be'eri is one of the kibbutzim right near the border that was had tremendous devastation and death there. I happened to visit it in January, and I mean, it still was just a terrible, terrible sight. And you could see a lot of the buildings were destroyed, buildings were marked. There was something on that when they went through, you could see they put how many like dead people were found in the building. It was like a circle and a number and the status of every building, and it was just a frightful experience. Beirut is also the site of, they have around January, February, they have beautiful poppy fields. And actually the cover of the book is a picture of the Beirut forest with the poppies. The poem deals with this. Poppies have always been, not always, but have been since the beginning of the 20th century associated with casualties of war. There was a poem in Flanders Fields, The Poppies Blow, and that's all about soldiers dying in World War I. In Beirut, every winter in January, February, there's like a poppy festival. It's called Darom Adom, which means the Red South, and people come. The other sort of background to this poem that Rachel always talks about this, that she said when she was a little girl, all the kids would go out and pick wildflowers. She said, we didn't have anything else to do. We didn't have televisions or anything, so one of the activities was to go out and pick wildflowers. And they were picking so many that eventually law was passed in Israel that to protect the wildflowers, and a certain number of species where you weren't allowed to pick these wildflowers. So this is Be'eri by Adi Bletman Sofer. Soon winter will be here. Weeping clouds will water the earth, making red carpets grow. The anemone will flower first, yet no one will come to admire its beauty. The buttercup will bloom next, but there will be no festival. The poppy is last to bloom. Silence. No one is there. The protected flowers had already been picked in the fall. Of course, the protected flowers here are the people who lost their lives. The next poem, just say a few words before I ask Michelle to read it. I was in Israel with Wes and Shira in July, I think, and we visited a number of organizations that were seeking help, financial help from CJP, and a lot of them were dealing with mental health, and there was a mental health crisis. One of them was an organization called Bishvil HaMachar, which means for tomorrow or on the path to tomorrow, and it was an organization specifically dealing with soldiers who had been in Gaza and were suffering from PTSD and other anxiety, and just were kind of, in a very difficult place, and this organization basically was focused on helping them. So this is a poem about one of these soldiers coming home. So Michelle, would you like to read that for us?
As I do, Michael, I also have a question for you about mental health, because we are just reading a few of these this morning, and they are just gutting poems that are so hard to carry, and you must have spent so much time with each of these poems. How did you do it? What inspired you to do it is my question, which you can hold until after the poem. No savior. A man returns. He hasn't been here for weeks. The smell of the place has already gone from his body. Domestic items have been forgotten. Even his lovers have disappeared from within him. But now he is here, trying to get in, to take off the uniform, asking about the children, about her fears at night. He says he stopped for a minute to buy her something small, Now he's trying to change the language, to get close, to be present. But he is still in the field. He is still the scream. He is still the blood, which is the soul. And there is no one to save him. A woman tries to draw close, to whisper to him as before, through the crevices, to be with him as they were before, to pull him out of there, all of him, without leaving a single body part there, not even the scream, to revive him just like that forever until he is back. But now, how to be with him now? How to open wells that were sealed and filled with earth, and there is no one to save her.
Thank you. To answer your question, working with these poems was a way for me to connect with what was going on. I think all of us try to figure out some way to make this real. I have an app on my phone that goes off when there's a rocket attack in Israel, and I can get it on my watch. And this morning there were rockets attack up north, and so it's just a way to connect with what's going on. And obviously, our experience, we're far removed from it, and can't compare our experience with somebody living in Israel. But it's a way of connection. And to be fair, I just love the exercise of translation. So I mean, there was some pain involved, but also the challenge and the working with the Hebrew. I love finding language in the Hebrew poems that is based on whether it's the Tanakh or rabbinic literature or liturgy, and you can't write a Hebrew poem without, I mean, every word has these layers of meaning. It's also interesting, in Hebrew doesn't have as many words as English. We have a lot more synonyms, so the challenges are there. There's a word in this poem, by the way, where it says even his lovers. The Hebrew word is ohavav, and I think maybe a better translation where it might have been those who love him. But it's just fascinating. So, but essentially, this was a way to connect, and I just feel very fortunate to be at the right place to be able to participate in this with Rachel and with Heather. This poem, and again, as I say, the PTSD in Israel or other manifestations of mental health challenges continues, and obviously soldiers are still going into these situations and leaving their families behind. So the families, it's a huge challenge, and there aren't enough therapists. A lot of the help that people are seeking is to get more therapists to work. There's an organization that I heard from recently that is saying a lot of Israelis, after the army, they go out to Thailand, Southeast Asia, and this is an organization to send mental health professionals to them to help deal with them. And this is one indication of that. The language is interesting. The first line is, "A man returns." And that should be a good thing, right? And then the second second stanza is, "A woman tries to draw close." The first stanza ends, "No one to save him." The other one is, "No one to save her." No one to save her, by the way, and it's not, the Deuteronomy quote here is from a different, it's about blood, which is the soul, which is another thing. But if we didn't footnote, there is no one to save her is also, the Ein Moshe Allah is in the book of Deuteronomy, and the scenario is a woman who's being raped in the field, and she screams, and there's no one to save her. So again, that's just something that you hear. The word in the second stanza, in the fourth line, to pull him out of there, the word is limshototo. Limshot is the verb used, it's part of Moshe's name. Moshe was drawn out of the water. So this resonance with what these words can also mean is embedded in every one of these poems. The last poem here is a poem by Rachel Goldberg-Polin, Hersh's mom. And as you'll see, this poem was written in mid-December. We can tell that from the poem. And as it happens, Rachel has been a student of Rachel. So when we put this book together, one of her poems was included. All the poems in the book were originally written in Hebrew, and we translated them into English. This poem was written originally in English. We're going to read the original poem, and we provided a Hebrew translation. So this book was was done through Amazon. It was only available through Amazon here. Getting Amazon to Israel is a challenge for a lot of reasons. That you don't get it like in 2 days like you get it here. The postage is more, and often the post office doesn't even deliver books. You'll get a note from the post office. We're holding a book for you. Certainly large books. They don't have mail boxes. It's a whole thing. So people have to go to the post office to pick up the book. They have to wait in line. So we decided to print some books in Israel. So we had a few hundred printed right away. I think we're now up to printing about 600 in Israel, and had them sort of special arrangements for delivery to pick them up. And Rachel Korazim's plan was to bring the very first book that was published to Rachel, who was waiting for her son. So unfortunately, the books arrived 2 days after we learned that Hersh was dead. So she brought the book to the Shiva and gave it to her there. So another meaning. So the book, by the way, the title Shiva of the book, it refers to Shiva, but also Shiva is 7, and it's October 7th. So it tries to bring in both of those. This originally it was a poem of hope, and I think let's listen to the poem.
It's a hard one to read today, Michael. Thank you. One tiny seed. There is a Yiddish lullaby that says, "Your mother will cry 1,000 tears before you grow to be a man." I have cried 1,000,000 tears in the last 67 days. We all have. And I know way over there's another woman who looks just like me because we are all so very similar. She has also been crying all those tears, our sea of tears. They all taste the same. Can we take them, gather them up, and remove the salt, and then pour them over our desert of despair and plant one tiny seed, a seed wrapped in fear, trauma, pain, and hope, and see what grows? Could it be that this woman, so very like me, that she and I could be sitting together in 50 years, laughing without teeth because we have drunk so much sweet tea together, and now we are so very old, and our faces are creased like worn-out brown paper bags, and our sons have their own grandchildren and have long lives, one without an arm, but who needs 2 arms anyway? Is it all a dream, a fantasy, a prophecy? One tiny seed.
Thank you. Hersh would have turned 24 yesterday. So I said this was written as a poem of hope, and we kind of now know the rest of the story. But Rachel Goldberg-Polin is still out there with hope for the rest of the hostages and advocating for them, and I hope that should give us also some incentive to have some hope. So thank you, Shabbat Shalom.
Our class is not over yet. We're just getting started. First of all, Michael, thank you. So much thank you. Thank you, and Heather and Rachel for putting this booklet together. Thank you for translating it. Thank you for sharing it this morning. Thank you for your heart and soul. I wanted to just breathe and then invite people to share, if you wish to share, how this poetry makes you feel. Gary.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have an instant answer to your question. It is profoundly impactful, every poem that you read. But Michael, I apologize. I don't know you or your background at all. I wonder if you could say a few words about what brought you to this point, what you do in your day job that has allowed you to help in this extraordinary enterprise.
So first of all, I should say it started because I had an excellent Jewish education. I attended a Jewish day school and just kept up my interest in Hebrew language, Jewish studies, through college and afterwards. So I was very fortunate to have the tools to be able to do this. And beyond that, I practiced law for about 34 years, and then for the last 18 years, I've been running a charitable foundation. So this is kind of a hobby. And as I say, I happened to be lucky to connect with Rachel Korazim at the right time to be able to help her with this work.
Thank you for the question, Gary. Other reflections on how these poems make you feel? Yes. Avi.
First, thank you for organizing this event. I think it's very important, given the date on Monday. I grew up in Tel Aviv in a street called Bialik Street, and across my house was the house of Chaim Nachman Bialik, who's a national poet. And many of you might know that it was the pogrom in Kishinev. I think it was 1905 or 1903, which is now Ukraine or Russia, that basically most of the American Jewry is a result of it. People decided with no more future under the Tsar, and they migrated. The US was open at the time. I think about 1.5 or 2 million people ran away, few to Palestine, which became Israel, but most is what we see around us here is the American community. And there are two poems that I like Bialik. I used to memorize a lot of his poems, but forgot many by the time. One is Be'ir HaRega, where he talks about, he was not there, but he kind of saw it and kind of tried to give everybody the essence of all the rape and all the massacre, very similar to what we've seen in a much bigger scale in Otef Aza. And another one is called Ri'tichem Bekotzer Yadchem. I've seen you with short hands, kind of criticizing the Jewish leadership in diaspora, saying you do nothing to protect yourself, you should be Zionist, you should move out of here. And I thought both of them were kind of central to kind of seeing how to react a little bit from a distance. This poetry is very touching. I read it, I wrote to Wes, I was crying when I read it. It's very touching. What it lacks is some perspective. But it's the authenticity is because it was written while the pain was still there. And we pray for peace.
Avi, thank you. David Diamond.
Shabbat Shalom. The poems are beautiful and very poignant. The word hope appears a couple times in these, and when we were there in February, the flowers were in bloom in Nova. They were in bloom. And there was a certain sense of resilience and response and community that this evoked. And I'm wondering if any of the poems, maybe it was too soon, or maybe people are too hurt, but was there a capture in any of these poems this sense of community, this Am Yisrael Chai, that kind of this attack evoked, that that would give strength, you know, you know, and speaks to the strength of the Jewish people.
So there are poems, but I'm just looking for one here that's there's a poem about here. Let's see. This is a poem by Tal Shavit on page 75, and it sort of shows the desire to do that, but also the challenge, and I'll just read it quickly. It's called A Good Day. I want to manage all the emergency situation rooms, to mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the children, of all the single mothers and those who are gone. I want to turn myself into bulletproof vests for all the fighters, become iron domes over the heads of all the girls, each and every one, to sustain all the families, the evacuated, the broken, the crushed, return those who were taken, bring back all that is gone. I want to collect all the donations and take them to where they belong, to pass all the messages, to make all the sandwiches, to oversee all the efforts. But on a good day, I manage sometimes to breathe, sometimes to drink, sometimes to call loved ones. On a good day, I manage sometimes to cry.
Any last people want to share before I have a wrap-up question for Michael? Any last people to share? Marcia and Donna.
Just one of the questions is this, could you talk to us about who Heather is? Because we know you, we know Rahel Korazim, but we don't know Heather.
Heather is a woman who grew up in South Africa, lives out in California, and was one of the students in Rachel's online classes, and also kind of volunteered to help. And as I said, I think she made many contributions, but to me it was mainly making this sound more like poetry, even though it's, say, written as prose.
And Donna.
I'm really struck by the immediacy and the personalization that we feel for these individuals as a result of this poetry. It's very powerful. And I'm struggling to put this thought together, but you talk about the difficulties of translation and the limited number of Hebrew words, and we always hear plays between this word is almost that word. And there's something about rather than impediments, there's something about the Hebrew language that is structuring associations and greater depth and complexity in the very way it caused you difficulty. It is adding to these poems. I don't know how to really express it articulately yet, but it's almost like very modern associational language.
No, that's true. Look, we're the people of the book, and even in the Bible within itself, you see wordplay, you see all kinds of things, and even from book to book, scholars find all kinds of connections where this phrase in the book of Ruth, and then if you look at the story of Joseph, it's very much there. I just say to Avi's point, I'm sure there will be poems written a year from now, 2 years from now, reflecting on, and unfortunately, the event isn't over, so this will go on.
Michael, just to wrap up, I have a single question for you. Today is October the 5th. The one-year Yortzeit is 2 days from now, on Monday, October 7th. How does the work you have done with your colleagues on preparing this book of poetry, how does it shape how you think about the one-year anniversary of October 7th?
Well, as I said, a lot of us want to have a way to relate to this, and poetry historically is a way to express something that prose doesn't fully convey. And I think if people are looking for ways, whether it's on this October 7th or next October 7th, or in between, to try to relate to the event in a special way, in a way that really engages with the emotion, with the heart, that hopefully this book of poetry can help.
Michael, just deepest gratitude to you for all the technical skills that you brought to the translation, but even more to your neshama and sharing it this morning.
Thank you.
We are going to rise and conclude with Kaddish Shalem. Yikadal v'yikadash merabah, v'yolma divra chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehi shemei rabba mevorach li'olam u'la'omei omaya. Yiporach v'yishtabach v'yitpo'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hadar, v'yit aleh, v'yit halal, shemei dekudisha, barichu, la'ela, mikol birchata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechamata, damiran v'alma v'imru, amen. Al Yisrael, v'al Rabbanan, v'al Tamidehon, v'al kol Tamidehon, v'al kol mandi askim b'oraita, Diviatra Hadein Vadi Bachol Atar Va'atar Yehe Lahon Ulachon Shlama Rabba China Vachista V'Rachamin V'Chayin Arichin Umezona Ravicha Ufor Kana Min Kadam Avuhon Divishmaya V'Imru Amen Yehe Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chayim Tovim Aleinu V'Al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen Oseh Shalom b'Ramav, Hu barachamav, Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu v'al Kol Yisrael, v'Imru, Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you all for coming, and again, Michael, deepest gratitude.
Thank you.
Extremely powerful. Extremely
It was,
powerful.
yeah, thank you. Well, it's the poets.
You made it come alive twice. You made it come alive once, and you made it come alive